Hello, 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 everybody, and welcome to my channel. This is the last panel of day 2 of the Evergreen Writing Oasis virtual writing retreat. This is the diversity panel. I am so very glad that you guys are here. My name is Cashay Warren. I write short stories, poetry, and the occasional blog post. I consider myself a writer and a photographer. I write in multiple categories from uh, uh, horror short stories to fantasy and contemporary. So yeah, that's me, and I consider myself a Black American female. Lauren, your turn.
I'm Lauren. I write poetry, fantasy, and paranormal romance. I would consider myself a writer and a blogger. I have my own blog. And I guess I would consider myself a white female that is disabled with a blind and visual impairment.
Marisa, your turn.
Hey everybody, I am Marisa Mohi. I am a writer, freelance writer, journalist, tarot reader. I kind of just do it all, whatever I feel like doing, that's what I do that day. I typically write, when it comes to fiction, in a genre I like to call prairie gothic, but I also do a lot of blogging, a lot of feature articles for newspapers and magazines and stuff like that. And I am an Iranian Mexican citizen Potawatomi Nation member of that tribe.
Thank you. Kevin, your turn.
Hi, my name is Kevin. I consider myself a writer and author tuber. I write a little bit of everything, young adult, fantasy, contemporary. Contemporary seems to be more my sweet spot, but I'm trying things like adult fantasy and adult romance kind of ish. So a little bit of everywhere. And sorry, I had to write down what I had to say. I consider myself a gay male. I go by he, him.
And Liselle, your turn.
Sorry. I'm Liselle Sambury. I'm a young adult author. I write primarily young adult fantasy and sci-fi, mostly contemporary and urban fantasy, novel-length works. I am a Black cishet abled woman, with a Trinidadian background and Canadian.
And Catalleya, your turn.
Hey, my name is Catalleya Storm, and I'm an aspiring author. I write poetry and short stories, as well as sci-fi and fantasy novels. Currently working on what I hope will be my debut novel. As far as diversity goes, I am a Black, capital D, deaf, hard of hearing, disabled, trans Muslim.
Awesome. And Kat, I think your TV is still going, and so it can be heard through the thing. So you might have to turn that down a little bit, just so that when you talk, we don't get the background. All right, guys. So today, this is going to work a little different from my normal streams. What is going to happen is I'm going to moderate this panel, and we have 4 questions that we're going to start off. Once we get through those questions, we are going to get to the questions that you guys have in the comments. I will not be answering questions tonight. I will just be asking the questions. So definitely feel free to put whatever questions you have for the lovely people on this panel in there today. So with that being said, the first question of the night is, what are your thoughts on the current state of diversity in writing? For this, we want to talk about diversity in writing and diversity in publishing. If there is someone who would like to go first, let me know. All right, I'm going to volunteer somebody now. All right, go ahead, Marisa. Thank you. Thank you, Marisa. I appreciate that.
Okay, so from my perspective, I think we can always look at diversity as a question of who has resources and who does not. And we know that writing is something, like Virginia Woolf wrote, a room of one's own, and you have to have the time, you have to have the space, you have to have the financial comfort to actually sit down and be able to write. And we know that there are communities that, typically or historically do not have access to these resources. So what I think is missing from the conversation about diversity in writing is who has resources and who does not. So if you look at the public education system, where are all of those dollars going for creative writing programs and for libraries and things like that? So we have to make sure that in order to have diversity in writing, we have to have those resources early on, because I think almost every writer falls in love with writing at a really young age. Like, there's a book that just kind of, is magical to you, and that's something that basically becomes a part of you. But if you never have that experience, it becomes really difficult to ever want to do that. So I think diversity in writing starts early, but also it has to be something that while writers are working has to be, they have to be given the resources to continue writing. And so there was a big conversation on Twitter about Publishing Paid Me, where we saw that a lot of writers of color were not compensated equally. I will say that, like, the writing industry as a whole is very misogynistic. If you come from the right schools, if you come from the rich families, if you have that East Coast prep school background, you're going to get like the huge advances. Your book's probably not going to earn out. That typically happens, but it doesn't matter because those writers keep getting those huge advances. And so when we talk about diversity in writing, I think what it has to be is a question of who has resources and who does not. And that will always answer our question of whether or not writing is ever diverse.
I like that. I like that answer. Come on, can we snap for that? I like that one. I like that one. So I guess I'm gonna just take my cue from the first one, and I'm just gonna volunteer the next person. So on that note, look, she took her cue from Marisa. She was like, I'm gonna volunteer myself. Go ahead, Lauren.
Wow, Marisa did a really good job of answering the question. I was kind of sitting here listening to you and thinking, like, how do I answer? And then a thought came to me. I think the issue with diversity is, especially I think for writers, is unless they're writing about their own experiences, they want to check all these boxes off in their book, but at the same time, so that they can include more people in their story. But I think at the same time, they're afraid of offending that community. I know for even myself, like, until I did the diversity panel with Cachet and Dana and Catalleya, I always questioned, like, why didn't I ever have a character that had a disability? And I think part of that is, as a writer, you have to be able to put yourself out there and be vulnerable.
I love that. I think that's very, very true. Very true. All right. Does anybody else volunteer as tribute, or do I got to pick you? Go, Kevin. Go, Kevin. Go.
To piggyback off that, I was just talking to my boyfriend earlier about this, because around like 2008 to 2012, I was really into paranormal romance. And so the first full-length book I ever wrote was paranormal romance, but I wrote a straight, white teenage girl. And it took me a long time talking to my sister and talking to Damien, like, why would I choose this? And I never wrote gay characters, let alone male characters. And it is because back then I believed that the only way to get published was to write a straight, white, able-bodied teen girl. And I think that to an extent, at least publishing now, at least traditional publishing, has come along, that we are seeing other voices and other ethnicities and just all these different marginalizations that before it felt like weren't even possible. And it was really eye-opening to realize that that was why I wrote this main character, because I didn't believe that I could see myself in a published book about paranormal romance. Like, there couldn't be a gay teenage boy who was falling in love with a vampire or a werewolf. Like, I didn't believe that it could happen. So there's so much more that we need to do in traditional publishing and in indie publishing, but I do believe that we've made strides in the right direction.
Awesome, awesome. Liselle, you want to go next, ma'am?
I was volunteering myself anyway. I kind of want to build off of like what Marisa talked about, and I think in terms of the state of like diversity in publishing, it has like I've noticed in traditional publishing gotten a little bit better. When I was a teenager, like seeing a Black girl on a book cover by a Black author was not happening. Like, I don't even have any memories of seeing that, to the point where, like, kind of similar to Kevin's experience, when I was younger and writing stories, I always wrote white characters because I couldn't even conceptualize that a Black person could be allowed in a story that wasn't about like slavery or like anything like that. But I think a big part of that access too is thinking about who's involved in the decision making in publishing. You know, those editorial meetings, who is in those meetings, who has access to those meetings, who has a seat at the table. And I think that really plays a big role in the state of diversity in writing and publishing in traditional sense, because you need those people on those boards to help fight as well. But then it becomes that issue of access of like, who can like go and take an unpaid internship in New York, one of the most like expensive cities in the world, and have that support. And I think that's kind of a big part. Like, we've taken this step forward in like more of those books getting published, but we still haven't kind of fixed the decision maker issue. And I think that's like a big thing that needs to change in traditional publishing.
Okay, I got to snap on that one too. Catalleya?
I feel like I just co-sign everything that's already been said. Like, literally everything has been said, in my opinion. I was going to bring up what was just said about I see a lot of like the diversity that's coming out, especially for Black people. It always has some like kind of talk around race or like literally everything has been said, in my opinion. I don't know why I'm hearing stuff. There we go. Okay. Sorry. It has a lot around like racism or, you know, slavery or anything like that. Like, that's like what you said. I would like to see diversity that is, I always say this, dinosaurs and Jurassic Park with a full all Black people, and not about, I mean, it's about human race and animal race, but like, that's different. Then.
Awesome. I agree. I definitely understand that. All right, so that takes us on into question 2. And I'm going to start with Kevin this time.
I think I touched on it a little bit. Is how has your diverse experience affected how you write? Is I feel more open to writing about gay teenage boys. I mean, that's the majority of what I write with my adult. I've been writing a gay adult. But for instance, when I was younger, a lot of what I read was, if there was a gay book, it was about, oh, a gay character is worried he got HIV, or the gay character is having to sleep with an old man to pay for his housing because his dad kicked him out for being gay. And that really affected me for a long time, because the traditional publishing books I was reading that had LGBTQ characters always told the story of, well, if you're going to be if you are LGBTQ, it's going to be a bad situation. You're going to have to go through bad things, and horrible things are going to happen to you. So I kind of swung the other direction, where I want to write these rom-coms, these happy, fun, diverse books that don't have to, just because you're gay doesn't mean you're going to get HIV and AIDS and die. Like, happy things can happen to you, and you don't have to be worried. So I actually saw what I was seeing as a teenager reading, I kind of flipped that. But I do appreciate for what I did have, but it wasn't enough as a teenager. I felt like I didn't see myself seen, but it has affected that I tend to swing the other way, because I feel like a lot of LGBTQ books out, even coming out now, are often focus on dark subjects and dark things happening. Not all of them, and I do believe those books are important, but I think that we need a healthy mix, so that way teenage LGBTQ people know that they have happiness also.
Okay, so I'm going to snap at that too. We need happiness. I am with it. All right, Marisa, would you like to go next?
So I think that I didn't recognize myself as a diverse person until I went to college. And the reason for that is that like I went to a predominantly white high school, very conservative, very Southern Baptist. So it was like a very kind of homogeneous sort of population. Then I went off to college, and I went from having all white teachers to having almost all Black professors, which was not necessarily a culture shock, but it was the first time where stories that weren't like traditionally revered were shared. And so I had professors that were writing about their experience as African Americans, or about their experiences as immigrants from Jamaica, or things like that. So that was something that was really important to me, because that was the first time I realized, like, oh, I can write about being Mexican, or I can write about being Iranian, and these sort of things. I will say that it's something that I'm very slow to jump into, just because as a virtue of living here in the US, I'm not super connected with a lot of communities. And also, since I'm multi-ethnic, I'm not enough of one thing for necessarily those communities to think that I am a part of them. So it's kind of this weird sort of ether I exist in. I am slowly learning more and more about my heritage. And up until the pandemic hit, I was writing for my tribal newspaper and doing a lot of genealogical research and getting to do like traditional storytelling events and things like that. And that was awesome. But I think that being a diverse person in the writing world has kind of made me question my own life experience as to whether or not like what I feel is valid and whether or not that is worth sharing. And that's something that I constantly struggle with as I write, because like I've always seen myself as an outsider. So Kevin mentioned like all those books about, sad LGBTQ stories that we get. And it's like the traditional publishing world wants the outsiders to always be receptacles for violence, or to be there just to be sad. And it's not true. Like, we are all capable of experiencing joy. We can all have just kind of normal, boring, everyday lives. And that's something that you don't see very often. And I think like in bigger published books, it's always represented like that, characters of or minority characters are poor and sad or working very hard, or the disabled characters don't have, like the same quality of life as everybody else, just because they hate themselves so much. So like that Jojo Moyes book that came out, the Me Without You, where like the disabled character basically decided that he was going to kill himself so that the woman who loved him could go on and be happy. Like it just blows my mind that that's such a normalized story. And so I think that for me as a writer that kind of just has this weird identity that doesn't necessarily fit in a box, I'm always questioning whether or not my real happy story is valid, because it's never been presented.
I can understand that. That definitely is a conundrum. Liselle, what about you?
Yeah, definitely my experience has it's colored my writing. I pretty much exclusively at this point write about Black girls, and I'm really happy that Catalleya brought this up, but thinking of wanting more stories of Black girls getting to be the heroes, so getting to be witches, or be the girl that falls in love with the vampire and all of that stuff. And that's kind of really colored my experience. Those are really the stories I write, and race does play a role in it, just because I'm writing contemporary and urban fantasy. And I was writing something in my horror the other day, and the police pulled up because someone died, and I was like, that's a very different experience for my character than it might be for a non-Black character, for example. But yeah, and I bring that in. I always bring in my diaspora experience because I have a Trinidadian background, but I didn't grow up there. I grew up in Canada, and so that kind of mixture of cultures always kinds of ends up seeping into my work. I feel like if you're a diaspora kid, you kind of, it's just kind of the way your experience is colored, and it just kind of comes out in my work in that way. I have a lot of characters that are like that.
Awesome. I like being the change you want to see. I love that. Kat?
Yeah. So growing up, I was slow to read. I didn't get down reading until I was 10, and I I never really saw myself in books that I read as a kid. And even now as an adult, there's like sometimes where I don't see myself. And I know part of it is because when we think about diverse characters, it's usually like one part of me. Like it's either a black character or, I mean, there are some black queer characters, but half the time they are minority characters. And then, I mean, like background characters. And then, like, this is one thing that I've been talking about a lot in like the deaf community in general is like deaf characters who are black. And I think that's something that's just like, I don't know. I don't see a whole lot of writing on Black deaf characters or even by Black deaf people, you know. And I was doing this research where I was researching Black queer history, and I wanted to research Black deaf queer history, like see their stories. And I have yet to find anything. I've had to reach out to other people, and it's just like, I feel like we stop at the, like, I guess, main category, like, of each. So it's queer category, Black category, deaf category, disabled category. And we never really branch out into the, like, people that are intersecting each of those categories and telling those stories and having those people be main characters and stuff like that. And so I think that's something that's just, like, something I really want to change personally. And as far as like my writing with my experience, I feel like I started out like so many people who have diverse identities writing what I think will be what people want and what people like based off of what I've been reading and what has been popular. And so like now it's like, no, I want to write what I wish I had been able to read when I was a kid, when I was little, so that kids now can have that. And, you know, yeah.
Awesome. I definitely agree. Representation matters. And Lauren.
Yeah, so going off of what Marisa was saying, I know when I was in high school, it was predominantly white people and then like a small handful of Black, and that was it. I was the only person in my high school except for my sister that was disabled until I went to college. And it was like just a melting pot of people. Like I got to meet people that were trans and bi and, you know, people that were of color that were also disabled. And it's just an eye-opening experience learning something outside of, you know, what you grow up doing. And, you know, thinking of like over what other people were saying, I think for me that I haven't tried to write a character that was blind or disabled because you have that phobia of, you know, if I write this and I want it to be traditionally published, it might not get published because a lot of stories that the person is disabled, especially in fantasy, they use the magic system to like miraculously heal that disability. It's like it's almost like you're not like having that disability makes you a weaker person, and I would like to change that concept. So my current writing and work in progress, I actually have 2 characters that have different degrees of blindness, and actually makes them a stronger character.
I love that. I love that. That gets me excited. That gets me definitely excited. So this next question, when we talk about what does diversity in writing mean to you, what does it mean to you in the writing that you do? Like, how do you try to do your best to encompass that in what you do and how you present yourself? Go ahead, Miss Liselle.
To me, writing diversely is really the inclusion of marginalized characters in your story, but it's also like the authentic inclusion, really doing your due diligence to be as authentic as possible, as well as avoiding harm. Because it's not just kind of like avoiding harmful representation only, it's also like providing authentic representation. I've read books in the past where a character is Black and they seem completely like a white person with like a black skin suit. They feel so like separated from any of that experience. They'll have natural hair and they'll like jump in the shower and like shampoo for 5 minutes and they'll jump back out. And it's just like, that's not how that goes. I think that's really an important part of writing diversely. To me, that's been a lot of the help of sensitivity readers and that sort of thing, because it's not just like, I made a video about this, but it's really not just like avoiding harm. It's also like being authentic and like accurately representing someone's experience. Especially in my case, I'm writing like contemporary fantasy, so it's based on the real world. So this is based on real people, so it should feel authentic to those people reading it. I think the last thing I want is someone to read my book and be like, who did she think she was writing? Like, what's happening over here? Because that's been so often my experience. There have been lots of books where I forget the character is Black, because I'm like, oh, were you Black the whole time? Or where authors will come out and they'll be like, this character was Black the whole time. And I'm like, no, she wasn't. Because if she was, you would have said so. And because you didn't say so, I know that she isn't. So it's that sort of thing. Like, to me, that's really a huge part of writing diversely. And also, like, because of my experiences in the past, I had written a problematic book. I also, for me personally, I make efforts to stay in my lane. I don't want to take up space from other people. And quite honestly, I could write a million stories about Black cishet girls and be perfectly fine. And that's really kind of, to me, what writing diversely means. And that's how I go about it.
First of all, you better say all that 2, 3, 4 times. I was with everything you just said completely. Kat, would you like to go next?
Sorry, I was trying to define intersectionality in the description in the chat, so I guess I'll just say it out here because someone asked. So intersectionality is a theoretical framework for understanding how aspects of a person's social and political identities might combine to create unique modes of discrimination and privilege. Intersectionality identifies advantages and disadvantages that are felt by people due to a combination of factors. So to get to that question, but one thing for me is I always say that I do have privilege in the deaf community because I am able to voice for myself. I am able to read lips. So I do caution people when they say like, oh, we're very diverse because we have this deaf person with us. And I'm like, hey, would you have me if I could not speak, if I could only sign? Because maybe that's something that you need to check with yourself and realize. So that's one way that intersectionality, even though I'm oppressed because of being deaf, I also do have some privilege in that community. Anyway, what does diversity in writing mean to you? So to me, diversity in writing just, I don't know. I think the basis for me of diversity is just realistic, I guess, realism, because I mean, I live diversity. We're all diverse. The world is diverse. And I feel like in writing, it's been an escape for some people and not for others. It's been more so of oh, I've gone into this world that's now all white with one Black character. It's not really an escape for me. It's just story. Whereas I would like diversity to be where everybody can pick up a book and escape in that book and see themselves in that book in a way that I think hasn't been done that well. I mean, it's getting better, but it hasn't been done that well. So to me, it just means reality. It means we're finally actually, I don't know, it's just reality. If that makes any sense.
Yeah,
it does. Because we've talked about in previous times, like how certain situations you'd be like, we'd never do that. I know, like Kevin, I know you've seen something like, that's not how we act. That's not what we do. So that's why I'm picking on you. You're next. Like, I know.
So piggybacking off of what Liselle said, it's obvious to, if you're going to write about a diverse person, it's obvious to them if you did not do any research, because I read a very popular series that was not the one people are talking about in chat. And in the third or fourth book, it was a 4-book series. In the fourth book, I believe, all of a sudden, the author said that this character was Black. There was no indication, no mention, absolutely nothing the entire time until it was either the third or fourth book. And it was actually jarring because it was like, it felt like the author had just shoehorned that in. And I also have read books, young adult books, that were not written by own voices, and the gay male teen, they react and do things that I don't believe they would act that way, because if you have that lived experience, you would have some kind of hesitation behind what happened. I don't want to call anybody out, but it's very obvious when you haven't done any sensitivity reading, have any sensitivity readers or research because of that. But to me, diversity just means I went to college with a large population of Black people. I moved to LA where there's a large population of Hispanic people. And diversity just means reflecting my real world, where, as I mentioned earlier, when I was a teen and reading a lot of these books, it was all white people, all white straight people, and it just wasn't real life. And for some reason, I felt like that was okay. Like I felt like this is real life. But when I really looked around myself, it wasn't. So diversity is just reflecting what is really around me, but also giving voices to those people that are marginalized, because I feel like often their stories are told for them, and knowing when to let people tell their own stories. If that makes sense.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Lauren, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I want to piggyback off of what Kevin said. I think the biggest thing is being authentic. I mean, if you're a white straight person and that's all that you want to write, that's fine. Stay in your lane, because, like I said, some people are afraid to do research and get sensitivity readers because they're like, well, I have this perfect story in my head that I want to tell, and I don't want to make any changes to it. But I like how you were saying, like, if you look around yourself, that's not what's all around you. I mean, there's different people in my neighborhood, different people of color. Even my community, like, disability is definitely a spectrum, because just from my own experience, like being blind, it can affect you in different ways. So, there's a lot of stories that I could tell with a blind character. Because, I was thinking the other day that I wanted to write a story with a character that was Black, and I was like, I have people I could reach out to be a sensitivity reader when I'm ready to tell that story. Because I think it's important for people that feel that they're marginalized to tell their own story.
I love that. That stay in your lane. I love that. Marisa?
Yeah, so everybody has brought up really great points. One thing that for me, it means that I don't have to pull my punches or explain everything to you, because one thing that really irritates me is when you write a Hispanic character and then they start, they say a couple of words in Spanish, it's like a very loose Spanglish sort of conversation that they're having. And then editors will tell you, like, okay, in the next few paragraphs, you really need to give some context for this, what this word means. And I disagree. It's 2020. Your readers have access to Google. And I think that, that takes away from the story when you're constantly defining things for your audience. And also, if they can't pick it up from the flow of it, then they do need to Google it. So I think that just being free to tell our stories, to use language that we normally hear, whether that's, Spanglish or like your immigrant parents' way of trying to explain something. Like, I think that that's a really good thing to start including in books, because I don't think we see enough of it. And I think that that's like a really common American experience.
I agree. All right, so we have the last question. As you guys have been commenting, I have been gathering those questions and putting them into the private chat so we can go through those. So definitely keep those coming. The last pre-question that we have is, what would you suggest to others wanting to write characters outside of their demographic? And this definitely touches on a few of the questions that people have already been in the chat, but we definitely want to talk about what you guys' thoughts are and how people could do that and do it justice. Anybody like to go? Oh, Lauren wants to go first. All right, Lauren.
Okay, I had a thought of like, it's gonna flutter away. Wait, let me make sure. Okay, I'm not mute. So like I said before, it's definitely important to do research, but I think it's definitely also important to use the resources that you have. Like, there are a lot of people on YouTube that tell the experiences that they go through. Like a lot of the rest of us had said, to reach out to sensitivity readers also, and make sure that if you're going to tell a story outside of your own lane, that what you're telling is authentic.
All right, plain and simple right there. Kevin, what do you think?
I think that for a very long time, decades, even longer, the stories of marginalized people have been told by people that aren't that marginalization, whether that is anything. Any marginalized story has often been told from a cishet white point of view. Even when it's, I think you really have to ask yourself, what is it that you think drives you to really want to write that story? Why do you feel the need to tell a story from a marginalization that is not you? And ask yourself if you think that you are really prepared, because I've heard the argument, well, this story really needs to be told because it's never been told before. And I can guarantee you that if you have a story idea about a marginalized person, whether it's through indie publishing or traditional publishing, that story has been told before, but that writer's voice has not been lifted up enough for people to know about that book. I can guarantee you somewhere that book exists. So if you think that you need to tell that story because it does not exist, it does. Just do your research. But I think you really need to ask yourself why it is you feel that's such a strong need. Like Liselle said, she could come up with a lot of stories about Black teen girls. So why can't you come up with an idea that reflects your own experience? And why do you feel the need that you have to step into someone else's lane? Because unfortunately, no matter how much you research or talk to somebody that has gone through something, I will never understand what it's like to be a Black person being pulled over by the cops. It doesn't matter how much I read, I will never authentically understand that because I don't have to face it. Same way, no one will really understand what it means to come out unless you have to. You can read about it and how horrible it is, or good, but you'll never understand the actual feelings that go behind that. And that, I think, is really where it comes in to be an issue, because to be authentic, you have to understand that. And I think that can open up a can of worms that you may not be prepared for, because people will critique you. People that have lived that experience, and rightfully so, will critique what you're writing. I hope that came across how I meant it.
Oh yeah, no, it came across great. Liselle?
Sorry, my mouse died briefly. Yeah, I think Kevin said that really well. And to kind of add an additional kind of perspective on this, I think to people that are writing outside of their demographic, I think you have to be prepared to own up to your mistakes when you make mistakes and learn and do better and move forward. I made a video about this recently, but I had written a problematic book. I was way out of my lane. I was doing problematic stereotypes, and I had to learn and I had to understand what I was doing wrong. I had to listen to people from that community. I had to do more research and really understand for myself And I think that's a really important part of writing outside of your experience. You need to be prepared to learn and do better, because I think at the end of the day, that's what really matters to people. You can mess up, and it's not nice to mess up, and it doesn't feel great, but when you learn and you do better, you're doing better for those people who you may have caused harm. And that's a lot better, and I think a lot more appreciated than fighting against it, or just like being like, okay, I guess I won't write any marginalized character ever again. Ever. And that's what I would say about that.
I love that. I love that. And that was a great video. If you have not subscribed to Liselle and saw that video, I definitely think you should check it out. I've watched it 4 times. It was very, very informative. It was a great video. And Kat, what about you?
Yeah, so what everybody said before, I do feel like you really have to get involved in the community that you're writing about, because like I think Kevin said this, like, you can do all the reading that you want, but you won't really understand the experiences. And I think one thing I don't like, because I have gotten this, someone just randomly wrote me, they were in a group they weren't even supposed to be in because it was specifically for our community. And then they wrote people out of the blue asking them to help them write something or whatever. And I was just like, that's not the way to do it. But I do feel like people do need to be around people in those communities and engage with them. I often, when I think about people writing outside of their demographic, I often go back to this one time I was in college, and everybody was supposed to, you know, do something that was connected to some other identity or whatever. And one girl picked being deaf for a day. And I told her, I was like, hey, like, come, like, there's actually an event coming up, and I'll show you around and blah 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 and whatever. Instead, she decided to sit inside of the cafeteria with earplugs in. And when she came into class, she was just like, it was a horrible experience. I couldn't listen to music. I couldn't order food because I couldn't talk to anybody. And I'm like, you think that deaf people don't order food? Like, I'm sorry. And like, I was in choir before, and I had somebody, like, I had interpreters, and I had, you know, help, whatever. Those are experiences that unless you're inside of the community, you know, you won't understand. And so I feel like if you are so hell-bent on writing from other people's perspective, that you actually have to engage with those other people and be involved.
I agree so much. And Marisa?
Yeah, so on the topic of being involved, like, I think that if you want to write outside your demographic, you have to acknowledge that your education up to this point has been incredibly biased, and that any education that you've received has been heavily influenced by white supremacy, which is racism, ableism, misogyny, you know, like all of those things all in one, eugenics, all of that stuff. And that has heavily shaped history in the US and the way that we are taught, the way that systems are organized, the neighborhood you live in. And so when you want to write a character who is disabled, or who is gay, or who is Black or brown, you have to start thinking about how those things have shaped their life, because maybe you haven't necessarily experienced it the same way. So for that reason, I would want to do a lot of research before I tried to write a disabled character, because I would want to know more about how history has historically treated these people, and I would want to know how they would be interacting with their specific environment. I would want to kind of do some research into how disability is environment specific and how it has evolved over time and that sort of thing. So just know that all the information you have up to this point has been heavily influenced by these things, and your perception of a specific community is probably incorrect in ways that you can't even imagine. And that's true for all of us. And it's just because we have these biases and we have to actively work against them because, you know, this is what we were trained to believe from day one.
Okay, so can I just say, we got through those 4 questions within less than an hour, and y'all gave some of the best answers I have ever heard. So to celebrate, for those of you who don't know, I have a little theme song. And I know that somebody needs me to sing it in order to get a bingo on the bingo card. So, well, I ain't got no tea, but if I did, it would be hot. I said I ain't got no tea, but if I did, it would be hot. I said I ain't got no tea, but if I did, it would be hot. 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 All right, so somebody better have got bingo. Somebody had better got bingo is all I'm saying. So now we're going to go through some of the things that people asked about during the chat. Marisa, there was a question specifically for you about being a writer from multiple ethnicities and your take on that and how you are represented equally with all the facets of yourself.
Yeah, that is a great question, and I don't know if I have an answer, because I will say that the way I interpret my life is through writing, and it's just always been that way, whether I was a kid writing angry nonsense about being put in timeout in my journal, or now as an adult, like kind of reflecting on what it means to be a part of specific communities. I think that it's really hard for me to know what to include and what not to include, and what parts of my experience are real or are perceived just based on always feeling like an outsider. Because if I'm being honest, like, the only people with my ethnic background, like the whole package of it, are me and my brother. And my older brother actually has autism, so we don't necessarily communicate on the same level. So we can't necessarily speak about how we feel or things that we perceive in the same way. So, which is not to say that it's bad. It's just that he communicates in a way that is different than the way that I do. So for me, it's always a question of, is this true? Why did this happen? And how do I make this clear to other people? Because I'm always reevaluating emotions or the way I felt under specific circumstances. And if I want to give my characters those feelings, I have to be clear about explaining kind of that outsider sort of feeling. It's weird. I don't know if I have a good a good answer, and I don't know if I think it's something that is just always going to be difficult. If that's all I can sum it up as.
Anybody else want to speak on that? I know the question was directed towards Marisa, but I want to give everybody a chance to answer if they had a thought.
I just had a comment. I just wanted to say thank you for when you were saying that your brother is autistic, that his way of thinking isn't wrong, it's just different. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's something that gets lost in the diversity conversation. Like, at the end of the day, whether you're neuroatypical or you have a physical disability or you're a different ethnicity, like, we're all just trying to communicate, and we all communicate in different ways. And I think what we each value in communication is just slightly different. And it's kind of a matter of learning how each people show up. And I think that's kind of like the key to figuring out how to write diverse characters, is like, how is this person going to show up and why do they show up that way? And then how do they make themselves understood? And maybe that's a little simplistic, but just for me, for being like a multi-ethnic person with a neuroatypical brother, that's kind of what my life experience has led me to believe.
Awesome. I love that. So there were a couple of questions about traditional publishing, so I'm going to kind of wrap it into one question. So with the publishing paid me hashtag changing the landscape of traditional publishing, how do you feel that is going to affect publishing houses and or bookstores? Go ahead, Miss Liselle.
I feel like I'm going to sound like a bit of a Debbie Downer here, but I don't know that publishing paid me affected the traditional publishing landscape. I think it showed everybody things that like a lot of people had already known. It just wasn't really public knowledge. I think it spread it out more and it really gave people that information. I don't know that that prompted publishing houses to do different things. And I don't think we'll see that until we start seeing new deals come up and being able to compare those deals and having people be able to talk about that. But I think as long as like publishing houses are still putting things in contracts that say you can't talk about your advance, as long as it's all part of Whisper Network, and quite frankly, as long as those, you know, those in positions of power in publishing houses remain not diverse or without many marginalized voices, it's hard to think of that hashtag actually effectively promoting change in that. So maybe I'm like a little bit pessimistic, but I'm not sure that it has actually changed anything at this point yet. But I think it really depends on your publishing houses, depends on editors, depends on that sort of thing. And I think you'll kind of start to see changes probably more at an individual level, but then that even if the editor wants to pay them more, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to get the budget for it. And so it's hard to say that it has done anything because we haven't seen anything.
Great answer. Kevin?
I want to piggyback off that. Everything Liselle said, like she said she was afraid she was being pessimistic, I was thinking it, and you said it first, is that unfortunately, I don't think it's changed anything until, like Liselle said earlier, until there are diverse people in places of power and also just on editorial boards. I don't believe that it'll change. I think, like she said, it just brought a light to a problem that a lot of people just want to very simply sweep away. Like, okay, well, we know this and we know it's a problem. Let's move on. Because it was a big thing there and then it's kind of just disappeared. Like people know what's happening. And like she said, it is in contracts that a lot of times you can't even talk about it, which is a whole issue all in itself. But I have some issues with traditional publishing because I have gone to editorial board and then been told, well, we already have a gay book and that's better than this. It's like, well, why are you comparing me only to the other gay books? Or I was told that I have an anxiety disorder. Well, it wasn't true enough. It wasn't real enough. It's like the editor claimed that because she had anxiety, she knew that how I was representing it was not accurate. I was like, well, it's different. Everyone experiences different. So, like she said, until people from diverse marginalizations have power, unfortunately, I don't think it'll change. I don't. It's sad. I hate to say it. I hate to be in the pessimism boat with Liselle, but it's the reality that it is a industry that is run by privileged people. And I know that as a white male, I do have privilege, and I acknowledge that. And it's so messed up. I have harsher words for it, but I can't say that on here. It's just I have a lot of issues with things going on.
First of all, can I just shout out you taking the time to say, I realize I have privilege? Like, there's so many people that can't say those words, like, out loud. And I just commend you for saying it. Just thank you for that, sir. I appreciate that. Did anyone else have any comments on this subject? Oh, go ahead. I'm tagging you. It's you. You're it.
So I think that one of the major issues with the publishing industry is that it is so old. It's like the oldest entertainment industry out there. And I know that the Me Too movement has kind of poked little pieces of it, but if it ever really did take hold in the publishing industry, I promise you that every creative writing department at every university would shut down because those professors would be fired, because it starts there and it moves up. So it's just a very old school, very entrenched sort of industry. And I think that the only people that really have power right now are the consumers. So, if we wanted to start a movement where, we want to know specifically how much writers were paid, like hashtags and just kind of basically poking at the publishing houses, to kind of encourage them to be more transparent about this sort of stuff. I don't know how far it would go, but I think if we normalize the conversation around it and make it like an everyday thing that we're talking about, I think it is something that will eventually get better. But, as both Kevin and Liselle said, I have zero hope right now that it will actually change anything. So
I just appreciate you guys' honesty about it, because that is a real topic that a lot of people do sweep under the rug as time goes by. Like, we know some things are only popular for a little while, right? So with that, we talked a little bit about intersectionality. So when we talk about intersectionality in your writing and being from these diverse backgrounds, there are a few people who want to know, do you feel required to represent yourself in your writing? Like, do you feel required to write characters from your demographic? So whoever wants to hop on that one. All right, Kat.
Okay, that took a while. I wouldn't say I feel, okay, it's kind of twofold. I feel required, and also it doesn't feel like a requirement. Do white people and all the writings that they have written about white people feel required to write writing about white people? I feel like I have my experiences, so I can write about characters who are from my experiences, and that doesn't feel like a requirement to me. The only time it starts to feel like a requirement is when I think about like publishing, and especially with, things changing as far as diversity and all that. I think Kevin kind of pointed to this with the person being like, well, we have another gay book. And so it's like, okay, I know there's already white books out there. Okay, if I write a character who is from my demographic, I feel like it is a requirement for me to write it in a way that it'll be accepted by publishing industries. And so that's where the requirement comes. Because personally, I, even as a kid, would write characters and they were me. Most of my main characters had my age. So anytime you read my younger writing, you knew what age I was because that's the main character's age. But it only time it becomes a requirement is when I feel like I'm put in this box of what that character has to look like, act like, be, do, those are when I feel like there's a requirement.
I would like to piggyback off that. I don't feel required again, but also at the same time do, because it's interesting to me, why wouldn't you want to write a story about your own background? Especially someone who comes from, I didn't see a lot of gay books when I was younger. I wanted more. So I'm trying to write for who I was back then. However, where it comes to feel like a requirement is, at least with gay books, I can't speak for other marginalizations, it often needs to be written in a way that is, sure, authentically gay, but still, I struggle pronouncing this word, palatable. I can't say it. It still has to be palatable for a lot of times straight white women who are the majority of YA readers, especially in traditional publishing. So sure, you can be gay, but don't be too gay, or don't be that kind of gay, or things like that. So that's where it starts to feel like a requirement, where it's not that I'm not writing myself authentically, but it's still I hate to say watered down version, but it's a watered down version that people will accept, because I don't think that a lot of people that are in publishing are willing to accept what it means to be a gay teen. Well, they just want us to hold hands and maybe kiss each other on the cheek and then walk away into the sunset. It's gay teens, so, sure, there are some like that, but there are gay teens who do a lot more than just that, but people don't want to hear about it. And it feels like a requirement to write a version of myself that they are willing to accept.
I definitely understand that. Anybody else? All right, let's go on to the next question. All right, so the next question that we have is about writing diverse characters in fantasy, but that don't relate to contemporary experiences. So someone was saying that they're working on a fantasy story and they have diverse characters, but it's not set on Earth. And so how do you feel about that? And Liselle, I see your hand.
I have many thoughts about this. I think a lot of my thoughts are based on readership. So even if you are in a complete fantasy world, even if you are a complete sci-fi world, real people in the real world will be reading your books. And so I've read lots of fantasy and sci-fi that are in worlds that like supposedly have no racism, but then like the Black character is killed right off the bat, or they're the best friend and their entire arc is about helping the white main character succeed, or they like have a character that's like a weird, cute, like animal alien, but they've got Black skin weirdly, and they talk in a way that's like stylized. And so I think the idea that you can separate the real life experience because it's in a fantasy world or in a sci-fi world is like a fallacy, because real people are going to be reading it. And like Marisa mentioned before, like your biases can still come out in the narrative. And so I think it's still really important to think about that when you're writing, because it does come across and readers will notice, like in Lord of the Rings, you know, those orcs, you kind of notice when something is a representation of you and your culture, even if it's in something that is supposed to be separated and pulled apart from those experiences. And especially in fantasy, like there are so many fantasy worlds where they have like 7 different lands and like cultural landscapes from the people that are there. And to me, it seems kind of strange that you construct that, but then you deconstruct other things. And to me, it's just like, it's going to play a role in some way. And you still have to think about how that character is coming across. You still have to think about if you have a fantasy entourage and you have one gay character and they die, like those are the sorts of things that you still need to think about, even if it's in a complete fantasy world, complete sci-fi world, separated from real world things like racism, it can still come out in the writing. And the same goes for ableism and, you know, that sort of thing.
Go ahead, Kat.
This might not necessarily be the same thing. I don't know. But it makes me think of how I've felt about Black Panther, which I love, and I can't wait for number 2, and it's going to be amazing. But I'm just like, I kind of, one, they wrote out the queer characters, and 2, like, there were no people with disabilities, and I would have loved to see how like a place that has so much technology and advanced technology would handle like, or would have the stuff that they would have for people with disabilities, you know. I don't know, they were non-existent. And so it left me feeling the same way that I do feel about most things. And I think that comes from, if you are connected with so many different, like, that are like big groups that are oppressed, like you tend to feel like, okay, only part of myself exists in this world, so I don't really exist in this world, you know. And so even though it's a fantasy and Wakanda isn't real, even though I'm sure that you can get tickets to there, I would have loved to have seen that, you know.
I love that. I love that. Anybody else? Yes, Marisa.
So one little pet peeve I have with fantasy or sci-fi societies is how easily some writers can create these kind of separations within society based on like personality traits. So like, I mean, we see it in Harry Potter with the Hogwarts houses. We see it in Divergent with like I can't remember however many communities. But for whatever reason, there's like this big trend in creating these societies that are futuristic or, you know, fantasy based, that are all just separated by these like little personality characteristics. And then there's prejudices that come out based on those things. It always kind of blows my mind that there are some authors that can take such care with this fake made up world where like the brave people live in one colony and then the like really diligent thinkers live in another. But then there's still like this same level of racial bias that you see in those societies that they have created. So it's almost as if in creating these societies that like nobody took a minute to like actually think about what that would look like in terms of, you know, how the intersectionality of all that would be, you know? So I think that it kind of, you have to think about how race plays into your world. It is always going to be a part of it, and there's not some futuristic world where race, heritage, social class, where all of those things are never going to either be something that moves you forward in life or holds you back.
Awesome. All right, Lauren.
All right, I was trying to unmute myself. I just had a comment about that. I think it kind of makes me wonder if authors that make up these, you know, magical worlds based off of like a distinctive personality come from privilege, or at least they don't experience like being in a marginalized group. Because I wonder, like, the ideas of like race and ableism, like it just doesn't occur to them, or it's like just like an unconscious bias that they don't want to admit. Because I don't think that they're writing that way on purpose. I just think like they're writing based off of what they've experienced. So if they haven't experienced being in a marginalized group or, you know, being discriminated against, how are they going to write that authentically in their story?
And that brings us to the next good question, and one I think everyone is going to have something to say about. So someone was asking, well, if you want to write outside of your demographic, how do you go about contacting people to make sure that you're doing your due diligence? And when do you know you've reached enough research? When is research enough? Like, when have you got to the point where, oh, you don't have to do anymore, your story is great? Who wants to go first? Oh, these smiles. I can't wait to hear these answers. I'm picking on Marisa because she's laughing the hardest.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you should start off by reading and watching some Own Voices stuff. I think that that's a really good place to start because you can start to see how people view themselves and how they portray their feelings in their work. So I would start there first, and then I would probably move to some nonfiction stuff, like the creative nonfiction personal essay. That's a big genre. You can read a ton of them for free on Medium. So people are always writing about their life experience. So I would go there. I would caution you against just, you know, asking people that you're not really super good friends with to, you know, educate you. Not that that's a bad thing necessarily, but like if some rando shoots me an email that says, hey, I'm going to write a Persian character. What do Persian people like? I'm probably going to be incredibly flippant and I'm going to say saffron and then leave it at that. Like, you know, that's not enough, right? So I think you need to, you know, like you might have friends in that community and you might be able to ask them, but, you know, like be very open and upfront. And, you know, you were asking a lot from a person to like have them, you know, share all these vulnerable things. And that's something that writers do naturally. So I understand that it's kind of weird when you feel like it's not that weird because that's what we do all day. So like I would really like push you towards reading a bunch of stuff and then also, you know, just preparing your sensitivity reader budget.
I think she said sensitivity reader budget as if it should be included in what you do. I just think she didn't say, allowance. She said budget, like you should plan for it. I didn't know if y'all heard that. I just thought I'd repeat it. Who wants to go next? All right, Kevin.
I agree with everything Marissa said, especially budget, sensitivity reader budget. If you do plan on writing from a marginalized point of view, this is a very, very important thing you should not skip. Goes back to, it doesn't matter how much research you do, you'll never understand that experience authentically. So you do want to make sure you have that. And I know for a lot of people you might think like, well, I don't have a lot of money. Sometimes people will do trades with you. So like, oh, you beta read my book, I'll sensitivity read. That, again, don't bank off that, because that is something that sometimes people will offer, but isn't necessarily a thing for everyone. There was a resource a few years ago, I don't know where it's at now, but it was a Google link to a list of all the people you could hire depending on, I wonder if I could find it, and maybe you can put it in the description later. It was like if you needed somebody from a certain disability background, or somebody that was gay, or someone that was Black, anything you could think of, there was a whole list of people you could hire. So these resources do exist. It's just about doing a little bit of research for the research. There are writing forums online, like Absolute Write, where I'm sure you could find people on. And when it comes to like how much research is enough research, I don't think we should ever be done learning. And like Marissa said earlier, it is hard. It is very hard, but I don't think that should deter you from being like, well, it's hard, so I'm just gonna read one thing from this one person who talks about being gay and then move on. You should also read, I think, widely within that marginalization that you are writing about, because again, not everyone's experience with being a certain thing is universal. But definitely always be learning. And then like Liselle said earlier, if you do something that is wrong, admit that you were wrong and learn from it and move forward.
Yes. Kat, you wanna answer that one? I seen you smiling, so yeah, I don't want to forget about
Um, well, sorry, I don't know why I'm out of breath. I haven't even been walking. As far as like how much research is enough research, I have been Black 30 years of my life, and I still research, about my culture, about the people that I grew up with. I ask my grandparents and things like that. I know I said ask, whatever, it is what it is. I know 2 languages. And then, but anyway, I will never be done with getting research. So I don't think they're, like Kevin said, and I don't want to say the name wrong. Is it Liselle? Did you say it, or was it Marissa? Who said? Somebody else went before Kevin, and I lost track. Okay, yes.
It's Marissa. You're fine.
I was like, somebody else went. But yeah, don't just go up to random people and ask them, hey, tell me more. Tell me more. Okay, I am weird right now. I should be in bed. But I do think that you should get involved in the community. That's what I feel like. And when I say get involved in the community, I mean okay, look up, are there events going on where you're at or anything like that? Now make sure it's events that are open to the public, because it is really annoying when people come to events that are specifically for that group of people. And then you show up and are asking for more information and wanting to ask questions. That's usually a place for us to be able to just live. So, but do that. Your phone, however you're watching YouTube, you can also do research through that. But one of the things that I will say is when you're researching, don't just find information and then be like, okay, yeah, cool, this says this. Cross-reference, because there are so many things on the internet that are not true, or that are only partially true, or are true in some cases. One of the things I really hate people saying, because they do this a lot, is they'll be like, oh, in Africa they do such and such. Okay, but what tribe exactly? What country in Africa? Like, it's not just Africa. Or, you know, oh, we want to do this because this is what Native Americans do. Okay, but what tribe? Like, there's none of these groups are monoliths. So you have to do your research to figure out, okay, what group is this actually connected to? And is this a group that I'm actually writing about, or is this something that I'm actually writing about, or is this just a broader section of the group that it has nothing to do with my character, and my character probably would never have any understanding of that? You know, I don't know if I'm making sense, but yeah.
You're making great sense. Lauren?
I really like what Catalleya had to say. I think it's important to get involved with the group and to ask questions, but ask questions in a respectful way. I think a lot of times when we're trying to do research for a particular group, in our head, like, oh, I can ask something because, you know, I have good intentions of learning more about that culture. But if you don't really know a whole lot about that culture, how do you know if what you're asking is sensitive, you know, if based off of stereotypes? Because, you know, like Kylie was saying, a lot of things on the internet are misconstrued, or a lot of sources will provide conflicting information. So don't just go off like the first thing that you find, because it might not be true.
Great advice. Liselle?
Yeah, definitely on the don't just ask anyone for expertise. People that sensitivity read have specifically said, like, this is a business I am operating to talk about these experiences and share this. And so those are good people to approach, or people you know really well. But just like hopping into someone's DMs to be like, can you sensitivity read for me? And you've previously never said that that's a thing that you do. You're just like a person existing marginalized, and someone is like, hey there, come help and teach me. And I did actually, I want to say I had someone slip into my DMs and did that, and they later realized that that was bad, and they emailed me to apologize. And I super appreciated that, because in some cases, and in my case, that itself almost felt like a microaggression, because I was like, what character are you writing? Like, are they an American character? Because I'm not American. Are they Black with like an African background? Because that's not my background. And so you can't assume that someone is everything that you are looking for, essentially. And that's the bonus of like the sensitivity reader, is that they've listed that out for you, and they've said, these are the things that I want to read for you for. On the end of like, when will your research be done? I feel like low-key never, because Catalleya mentioned this too, and Kevin.
The highest of like, it's never done.
Yeah, because people are not a monolith. People have such different experiences. People that might read your book and say, absolutely, you got that dead on. There could be other people that will say, wow, that was the most like offensive representation of my experience I've ever read. What you can do is you can do the best that you can do and do your due diligence to the utmost degree, and you can keep learning and moving forward. Because there may be times in which you learn things after the book is technically done. Like, when my book is technically done and out, there's still an opportunity for someone to point out something and for me to learn from that and move forward and do better. And so I don't think there's ever going to be a point where you'll be done, but you'll be as done as you can be, assuming you've done your due diligence.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
So piggybacking off Liselle and what Catalleya says, that we are living this experience of our marginalization every day. So like, our research, living it, never ends. So I don't, like Catalleya said, like, she reads about other experiences within her marginalization, because just because I experience something one way doesn't mean my boyfriend, who's a gay male, experiences the same way, or my friend does, or so everyone's always experiencing different. So we are still learning within our own marginalization. So I don't think there's ever a point where you should say, all right, I know everything there is to know about Black people or gay people, and I'm done right here. I think that you should always be learning. And then like Liselle said, like once a book's out, like you could still, like even if you did make a mistake, learn and move on. Not move on, learn and do better. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so that gets us through the questions that I saw in the comments. If you have more questions, go ahead and drop those in there. This kind of takes us to the more relaxed conversational part of it. So I have a few questions that I'm going to ask you guys that have to deal with your thought processes and your things on your views on things that you have read, seen in television, depictions of yourself. So the first question is, what is the #1 stereotype that you hate about your demographic? In reading, film, whatever. Yeah, I know. I was like, I'm gonna surprise them with these. Go ahead, Liselle. Go ahead.
Sassy Black girl best friend does not have her own arc, exists only to pop in and say sassy things that make the other characters laugh, and occasionally suffers something so that the white best friend can learn something, but like mostly there to be sassy. And this is another point that comes up, is not desired by any of like the boys around. I talked about this with a friend, like this stereotype of Black female unattractiveness. And I feel like that it like lumps into that stereotype altogether because they're not part of like getting the prom date or whatever. They're just there to be sassy and hang out.
That is a good one. I personally don't like being called sassy as a Black woman. It irritates the life out of me. Like there are so many other adjectives. Why do you use that to describe Black women? Like because it's a common thing. Why? Who's next? Lauren was like, nope, my hand is up.
No, because I wanted to piggyback off of what Liselle was saying. Because I think, okay, so there's one thing that annoys me is that it's not just characters that are blind, it's characters that have any type of disability. Is that they're this weak, helpless little lamb that needs to be protected and cared for by the other characters. And then I was reading a book the other day where a girl was in a wheelchair, and because of that disability, like it made her undesirable to other characters. And I was like, nope, I'm not reading the rest of the book. I threw it across the room. I started crying because I'm like, this is horribly misconceptional. Like, just because you have the disability isn't your only personality trait about you.
I love it. Kat, I'm picking on you. It's your turn.
So yes, Black people, but also like I think one of the things that I don't like is non-existent. The non-existent Black non-binary people. That's something to me. Not the non-existent trans characters or trans characters who are only about being trans or about transitioning or about being kicked out of their family and kicked out of their home and, you know, all that stuff, but not the trans character who is you know, going off to fight the dragons and, you know, saving the day and just so happens to be trans. I think that's something that just, yeah, for me, it's like the non-existence of characters that are like me, because we already have issues with there not being enough Black characters. And then when you go further down into that, into the intersectionality of that category, it's just like non-existence. So I would like to exist.
Right. We just want to exist. Marisa?
Yeah, so I have a few. I would say like just kind of a blanket statement. So believing whatever prominent politicians or media folks say about a specific group of people, that is always something for me, especially under the current presidency, that is hella problematic for me. But I will say, and you'll get more of this because Cache and I actually have a collab where I talk about this a little bit. My Mexican stereotype pet peeve is authentic food, and that is explained in the video, so I'll let you guys tune into that. My Iranian Persian pet peeve is this notion that we're all very conservative and religious, because my dad from Iran will straight up drink you under the table, y'all. And then for Native American heritage, just in general, but like for my tribe specifically, the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, I hate this notion that we're all very serious and stoic and full of wisdom. Like, I have like negative amounts of wisdom. That's how many mistakes I make in my everyday life. Also, like, one of the biggest tribal stories that like gets told is just a really silly story, and it's called it's like this big myth within the tribe, but it's called How Raccoon Got His Black Eyes. And the basis of the story is basically that the raccoon pooped and then shaped his poop into a cake and then fed it to the wolf, and then the wolf beat him up and he had 2 black eyes. So that is like an ancient tale that is part of my tribe. So like, we are capable of humor and silliness, as well as being like that stoic, stereotypical figure that cries when you throw a piece of trash out on the highway, if you guys are old enough to remember that commercial from a million years ago.
I like that. I like that you pointed out like the ones for your different, like where you fit. That was awesome. Kevin?
There are so many stereotypes that I hate about gay people. I think the one that I hate the most, though, is that there's 2 that are really up there for me. So one is the sassy gay best friend, which they're there to get their heart broken or die and only move along the story for the main character. But the one I really hate also is the promiscuous gay. So they have to be sleeping around. They can't be monogamous. And this also doesn't even pertain to just gay people. They also do it with bisexual characters. I mean, any LGBTQ, they just assume we all like to just sleep around and we can't be loyal and we can't be monogamous. And we're just there to, like, I don't know, sleep with everyone that comes in and we come into contact with, and that everyone's our type, and that, you know, it's such an irritating one for me. And it's like, it really gets to me. Or like there's a stereotype, if a straight guy is friends with a gay guy, well, he must be secretly gay, or he must want to experiment. And there's so many like sexual things that come with LGBTQ characters, and it's like, we're more than just sex and sexuality. So that's the one that really bothers me.
So I have to click on this because this made me giggle. The sassy gay friend who has an inner Black woman that annoys me to no end. That annoys all of us to no end. Like, stop. Go, Cat.
I was going to say, another thing that does, the stereotype that does irritate me is like the sexuality of Black women in general. Because I heard you clapping this time, but because before I came out as trans, it's like, that's what everybody thought when I told them I was queer. That's what they thought that I was doing, but I was asexual. So it was just very annoying to constantly have people, you know, and even I'm polyamorous, and I was in a polyamorous relationship. And that's like, I mean, you wouldn't just go up to people and ask, hey, how do you do it? But people would for us, and I'm like, I'm asexual, like, but it is a stereotype, and we see it in media, we see it in our books, we see it in all those things that, you know, you're sexual, or you are sexualized, but you're undesirable, but you're sexualized.
Yeah, my video for the collab with Marisa, I talk about that specifically with how Black women are portrayed in TV shows, with the inability to stay away from married men. That is a common thing in the characters that they portray with us. I even go back to talk about Sarah Bartman and how Black women's bodies were put on display across the world. Like, this was a thing that people did. And so I think it's very important to think about that when you are writing. Like, are you playing into these stereotypes because this is what you have seen in the media displayed? how realistic is that for that demographic? And I think as writers, as authors, it is on us to make sure we are being as authentic to that story as possible. That's why when we say sensitivity budget, when we say sensitivity readers, we're laughing, we're smiling, but it's not a joke for us because we haven't seen ourselves in these stories and we haven't seen ourselves portrayed properly. And frankly, I know for me, and I'm guessing for everybody else on the screen, we're tired of it, right? We're tired of not seeing the proper representation. And so part of the reason when I asked this question about stereotypes is I want you guys to hear what we are saying, what our voices are saying, not what people say, not what you might find on a Twitter thing or, oh, black people don't like this. No, we'll tell you what we don't like. Hispanic people don't like this. Gay people, no, we'll tell you. Disabled people will tell you. We'll make sure we let it be known. So I think that is a very important thing to think about when you're writing. So that brings me to the next question. How do you avoid stereotypes when you're writing? Kat?
So one, I do my research, and two, I wouldn't say that I don't think that if I'm writing outside of or inside of my demographic that I can say that I will 100% avoid stereotypes, even when I'm talking about my own community. But I think that it comes down to being willing to own up to that when you do engage in and show a stereotype, because I do know sometimes, especially when I was a lot younger and I was like, no, I am going to write Black characters, and so I write the characters that I see on the TV, and I'm like, but that's not necessarily my experience as far as like gang banging and all that stuff. Like, so I'm trying to write those characters because that's what I see on TV, but learning, that's a stereotype. And even as someone who didn't fit that stereotype, I still had a problem understanding that as a kid. And so like I feel like just owning up to it, is the key. And then also doing all the stuff that we said before about like researching and, getting involved in the communities and different things like that. That's another way. And then the whole budget that you're supposed to be starting up, yeah, do that too.
Anyone else? Marisa.
So for me, I think avoiding stereotypes comes from, and Kat kind of said this a little bit, like you see a portrayal on TV or in a book. And I think that for a lot of minority people, we're constantly learning who we are through someone else's point of view. And we internalize a lot of that. And then we kind of come to a point where we realize that that's not right. And so for me, when I'm writing or when I'm reading books, I try to think about like what my experience has actually been like versus what has always been portrayed. And then from there, kind of figure out, what it actually means, I guess. It's really hard because I'm constantly learning about myself. I don't necessarily feel connected to any heritage. I will say that like one of my favorite tropes about Native Americans is how connected they are to the culture and how important that is. And that is very true for a very small population. But for most of us, we are so disconnected from it. And, that was like the reason for the Indian Removal Act, basically to make us not identify with that culture. But it's weird, so I know that I don't even know about myself. So I know that I'm constantly researching just who I am on a day-to-day basis. So when I'm writing, I know that there's a lot of research that has to go into figuring out what other characters would be like and what characters who are part of communities that I'm a part of, what they would be like based on where they live and where they work and things like that.
I love it. I love it. Lauren, did I see your hand go up a little bit ago?
Yes. My comment was going to be, I think sometimes for writers, we write the story that we have in our head, And because of that, it's kind of hard to see that we even use stereotypes. Like, I was thinking, even if you're writing in your lane, it's still very possible for you to have bias and stereotypes in there because, like everyone else was saying, you internalize what you see in the media, and some of it is kind of true, but a lot of it is either like over exaggerated or based on stereotypes. But then you internalize that and you think part of that is acceptable, and then that kind of seeps into your writing. And then I think the other part of that is like it's good to have people in your community and people outside of your community look at it and say like help keep you in check to see if their stereotype or bias is there, but that you can grow as a writer. And I mean, I wouldn't say try to avoid it because you're going to keep making mistakes, but I think the best thing is to accept it and be able to own up to those mistakes.
I love that. I think that's awesome. Liselle or Kevin?
I will go ahead. Yeah, I think there's no true way to avoid all stereotypes. We're always learning, we're always figuring that out. Something that really helps me is that because I'm so involved in like a diverse community and I follow a lot of different people on like my social media and that sort of thing, I will regularly see people talk about representations of themselves that they see. And so on top of doing my research, when I'm actively listening to those people on a regular basis, things come up. Well, someone will say, blah, 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 this is a stereotype. And I'll be like, oh, I've written that. And I learn more about it and I adapt my narrative. And so you're kind of going to be like everybody else pretty much said in this constant state of learning. I think it's hard. I know like it's very natural, I think, to have this mindset of like, I don't want to mess up and I don't want to like put harmful things out there and I don't want to misrepresent people. But I think you really need to get into that mindset of learning and doing better and doing all the due diligence you can, because the idea that you will never mess up, I think it's very difficult. I would be shocked, honestly. And so I think it's kind of the same thing with this, like really, like everyone said, like being involved in those communities and really listening, even when you're not working on that book at that time, like listening all the time can be really helpful. I try and think of it like, don't just like jump into a community when you need it and then jump back. Like be involved in those people's stories on an ongoing basis.
I love that. I love that last part. Like, don't just jump in when it. Kevin, it's your turn.
Okay. Going off of what Lauren and Marisa said earlier, it's what we see in media and TV, we internalize. And I mean, I'm not afraid to say that, like, when I was younger, I did internalize that, especially when I was first coming to terms with my sexuality. I thought that all gay men were promiscuous, and so I didn't want to have gay friends because if I had a boyfriend, they were going to try and steal him. And so I didn't really have gay friends for a really long time because of that. And that's something that it's an internalized homophobia that I had for a very long time. And it's difficult to, we'll always be writing stereotypes. They'll come up, like Liselle said, like sometimes you won't even realize what you're writing is a stereotype. And I mean, sure, there are some sassy gay people. There are some promiscuous. So like those people might exist, but I think you have to be mindful when you're writing it and aware of what you're writing to try and not further these stereotypes that are harmful to your community. And I think this goes for marginalized people as well as people researching, is to be careful when it comes to things like TV shows, because TV shows are predominantly written by straight white men, and media is often dominated by straight white men. And so you may think that you're seeing like, oh, well, there's this gay person in this TV show, and this is good research for how I'm going to write my gay person. But that person, like, do your research behind that, because it doesn't mean that they're going to be written by a gay person and be authentic, or a Black person be authentic. So it's just be careful with that stuff as well.
I think this one is a good one, and I'm sorry that I'm covering up you guys' faces, so I'm gonna read it really fast. Great Fry says, I think it comes down to harmful stereotypes versus innocuous stereotypes, like superstitions in the Black community. My Black characters are often superstitious because I was raised with these superstitions. And the reason I want to bring this up is the question of what are some stereotypes in your community that you do want to write about, these things that as you and your community, you know, but people outside of your community might not realize this is a common thing. So, like for example, I don't know if the audience knows, but there's a such thing as Black Twitter, and on Black Twitter, there are constant hashtags where a good majority of Black people, no matter where you live, country wise, have experienced some of the exact same experiences, some of the exact same phrases and things in their home. Same with Latinx, Hispanic ones. I've seen them jump into conversations like that. I've seen biracial people jump into conversations where they've had the Black mamas be like. So, with that, what is a stereotype in your demographic that you like or do keep into your stories? I'm going to pick on Marisa.
So one thing that I have personally experienced that I think is kind of, I wouldn't say it's a positive stereotype, but I would say it's very common, is meddling parents. So like, I never get to be an adult. It's never gonna happen. Like, I am 34. I just got engaged. My parents are going to plan this wedding to the hilt, and it will not matter what I want. But that's what they do, and they're always taking care of you. You know, in a way that is aggressive, but it's always well-meaning. And I think that that's something very common in Persian families, but also very common in Mexican families. So just kind of, you know, like acknowledging that your child is well beyond the age where you need to take care of them, but then being completely incapable of not taking care of them.
I like that one. That's a good one. Lauren.
Wow, that's so crazy. I was just thinking, like, I've seen that's how a lot of blind people feel about their parents that are not disabled, that they have this duty that they're going to take care of them for the rest of their life, even when they're a grown adult. I've seen other blind YouTubers complain about like there's a lot of training videos of like 10 things that you shouldn't do from one is blind, and I like it because it's definitely like even though blindness is a spectrum, I think a lot of people have this experience of like people in their life or like even their own family that aren't disabled feel like they have to take care of them because like they can't live their own life, which is frustrating as hell.
I think that is good to note. Kevin?
So I have one that I just find funny that I like to see just because I find it funny, and it's the girl that wants to be best friends with the gay guy because he's just gay. It's like, oh, well, you're going to be fabulous, and we're going to go shopping. I just love to see that because I think it's so funny and ridiculous. But I think the one that I actually really like to see because I think it's accurate is like a gay character having an older gay mentor. Because I know a lot of gay people that do, LGBTQ just in general. And I have one myself who I call him my gay mom because he experienced things at a time, because he's older than me, at a time where being gay was very different. And I think that because the gay community shifts so quickly with rights and how we're perceived, that it's good to know how the older generation had to deal with it and how they experienced it. So I like to see that the older gay mentor figure, whether, when I say gay, but I mean LGBTQ just in general. I like to see the mentor figure that can teach you about this older generation, because a lot of, especially in in the gay male population, a lot of gay males were effectively, I mean, I say murdered by HIV because it was a disease known by the president that was not, president at the time, that was not taken care of. He knew what was happening and he didn't care. And so we did have effectively a whole generation of gay men wiped out. And so I like to have that older mentor figure that will teach you about the things that without them would be lost to time. It's kind of like learning something from your grandma. It's like, oh, this is how we did it when I was young. Like, it's nice to have that gay figure that can teach you about things when they were young.
Yeah, those families are real. Those families and houses I know here in Oklahoma, like, it's a whole thing, and I love it. I love it. Liselle?
I don't know if I have like specific stereotypes, but there's a lot of phrases like when you had said that like things Black moms say, like so many of like those phrases are in my book. Like my main character asked for, she asked for something and her mom is like, well, do you have money for that? Where is that money coming from? And like a family that's very like in your business, but wants you to not talk about their business to anyone else. Like all of those sorts of things, and to me, like the big thing is because this always is something I thought about all the time when I used to read YA, like when kids would like run away or would like go on long trips with friends for like ages and their parents would say nothing about it. I was like, my mom would never.
Never. Would never.
I could never be out all night and she not be like, what is happening? Where'd you go? And my mom's actually very permissive, but she would still be involved in that way. And then like little Caribbean things like strepsing. I'm so diaspora, I might not even be saying it right, but like it's a little, like the teeth sucking sound when your family's like annoyed. That's like a very like Caribbean thing, and like that's all over my book. And no talk back. That's the last one.
No. I said, but anyways, one time and got my whole face rearranged. It was a whole thing. Cat?
Oh, I was already unmuted. Can you hear me? Oh, okay, I've been unmuted this whole time. I didn't know. I don't know of a stereotype. I don't know. I'm trying to think. I know one that like kind of impacts me a lot, being deaf and Black, is the loud, being loud. And I talk very loud a lot because especially if I like take out my hearing aids or turn them off, I'll talk loud. Sometimes when I have my hearing aids in, I'll hear sounds and I won't understand, like really understand whether or not someone can hear my voice, because I personally can't hear my voice at that time. So I'll talk loud. And I've realized that if I'm around white people, because most of the white people that I'm around are like, I wouldn't say woke, but they're like, I'm around them, so they cool. But I'll be like, yo, if I'm talking loud, like, tell me, I'll get quiet. And 9 times out of 10, they won't tell me I'm talking loud. But if there's a Black person in that group, they'll be like, yeah, you need to. And I've realized that oftentimes it's because the white people don't want to tell me as a Black person that I am talking loud, because then there's that stereotype that Black people talk loud. And I'm like, no, tell me, because I'll be screaming, the people next door can hear you. like tell me. So I think that's one stereotype that, I don't know, that kind of impacts me a lot. But other than that, I don't really know the stereotypes. We're funny. We start stuff. We shade. We are the inventors of shade. FYI.
Alicia says, I think things that are more insider stereotypes are more fun to write than perpetuated stereotypes based off of what outside communities have perceived. I completely agree with that. I know that I am in a critique group and it's majority of Black writers, and all of us presented short stories, and in every single one of the short stories, somebody has something about food. Every single one of us. Like, Black people and food, it's a thing. It's a community-based thing. And I think for me, that's something that I've noticed, that no matter what I write about, how I wrote about a horror story with a ghost and she ended up being a chef, I don't know. It just happened. Kevin, I see your hand.
I just want to acknowledge something. that I think needs to be said, that something that bothers me about stereotypes with gay men and Black women is that a lot of stereotypes that people like about gay men are just things that Black women do, but people see as something bad. Like, so sassy gay man's funny, but a sassy Black woman, she's funny, but she's a sassy Black woman, but he's a sassy gay guy. So I think that's something that I feel like should be acknowledged, that a lot of stereotypes or things that people believe about gay people are that Black women have been doing it so much longer and better, and I just feel like a lot of people won't acknowledge that. And I just think it needs to be said that, like Kat said, that gay people didn't invent shade. We didn't invent being sassy, but for some reason it's acceptable when it's a gay person doing it, but not when it's a Black woman doing it. So I just think that's something that needs to be acknowledged, that don't find a sassy...
Come through with these
I'm just saying, don't
Come
say
through.
that a sassy gay guy is funny, but a sassy Black woman, well, she's annoying, she's crude. It's like, no. Like, it's a double standard that I think needs to be acknowledged and addressed.
I love that. Yeah, we're snapping on that. All right, you guys, we are coming up to the 10-minute mark. I did see one more question. If you have any more, go ahead and get those in before we get ready to wrap up. This question is specifically geared towards Catalleya. It was about, how would someone depict sign language in their writing?
You're on it. I was like, I want to make sure I get that question. Okay, so first of all, I want to say, if you're not following the Naked Firefly, they have a book that I think it's coming out like next week. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Comes out July 22nd. The
Yes.
Love.
Yes. Now, the character is not deaf, but the character is a selective mute and uses sign language. And one of the ways that she shows them using sign language is having it italicized. And so I think that's like one really awesome way. You don't have to always be like, they signed or whatever, And I will say also, because they had this in their book and they were very hesitant about having it, but the character stuttered in their sign language. And I am a stutterer when I sign. One, because I keep trying to use English grammar and trying to be like, oh no, I need to use ASL grammar. And it's just, so I stutter while I'm signing. And so like, that's something that's done. But yeah, like you would treat it the same way you would other languages, just acknowledge that it is in sign language, acknowledge the way that the hands move. And, sign language is dangerous. Eyes can get poked out. I'm just letting you know. So if your character is furious, they might, glasses might go flying. So just like, yeah.
In other words, it goes down. So there was another question from you. Great Fox says, can I ask you a question about sign names that's meta and might be a little silly? Did you mute yourself?
I'm not exactly sure. So like, is it just, I don't understand. I don't know what meta.
Yeah, I didn't know if it was a term that you knew. I was just giving it to you.
You're muted.
Am I muted?
Oh, am I not connected anymore? Oh, that stinks. Oh, see, this is what happens when you're deaf and you can't hear anything without, it's not connected. 1 second. Jeez.
With that.
Oh, wow. In the middle of this is real life here, people.
Hey, technical issues. Somebody got technical issues. We just had
technical can you hear me?
We can hear you the whole time.
Okay, we heard you. I cannot hear you. It disconnected from the Bluetooth. So anyway, what does meta mean?
Her question is, I have a character that's a coda. Can I give her a sign name as a hearing person?
Okay, so with books, I don't know. I don't know how you would necessarily, like, how is the person getting a sign name? I will say, like they're a coda, so they're a child of a deaf adult. For those who don't know, so how, like, it would go, are the parents giving them the sign name? And also, do you know how sign names are given? And like, do you have deaf people around you that you can also be like, hey, is this appropriate one? Because I have seen people give themselves a sign name and it's actually like a sign for a private part or like a cuss word. So that's one of the reasons why deaf people are like, hey, we can give you a sign name, but not anybody else. But yeah, but I also do make sure that in the book you do keep that tradition, because that is something that is really important in the deaf community, is a deaf person gives you a sign name. So I don't know if I answered that very good. If you want, you can contact me. I am very okay with you contacting me. And I'm going to try to connect this.
All right. So the last question of the evening before we do our outros, what do you think about gatekeeping a character not being blank enough? Anybody want to tackle that one? All right, Liselle, it's on you.
I'm gonna talk about it. I really think, like, because I find that this happens mostly in an own voices context, I feel like people writing their own experiences should have space to write their own experience and have it be accepted that it's not going to be the same as someone else's experience. To do an example, my story is Own Voices. I have a Trinidadian background, but I grew up in a very blended family. My grandma that I grew up with is white and she's from Montserrat, so she's Caribbean also. And it's just like the way we did things could be wildly different from how other Trinidadian people do things. Even where I grew up in Toronto, I grew up in a really white neighborhood. I'm going to be like, have a very different experience from people that, for example, like grew up in Scarborough, which is like a very Black and multicultural area. There's like Toronto slang that I cannot speak at all because I didn't grow up in the areas where that slang was used by those like largely minority groups. Whereas I have friends who put that slang in their Toronto books because they grew up with that. And so I think like people can have opinions about books. That's the thing about books. But I don't feel like people should have their identity policed when they're specifically writing about their own experiences because they may be very different. But that's my personal take.
Anyone else want to tackle that one? Everybody think she covered it? Oh, Marisa? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I don't want to like contradict anything. I think Liselle said it really well. I think at the end of the day, none of us are blank enough. And I think that it does come from communities, but I also think it comes from like a publishing standpoint. Like the big machine of it wants to be able to say like, look, we put a Mexican character in this book. So clearly they crossed the border illegally and are now undocumented immigrants. And that's how we know exactly that they're a Mexican character, even though that's not the experience of a lot of Mexicans in the US. So I think that we tend to feel like our stories aren't as important because we're not making that like despair story that the publishing industry wants. Like they want, sad minority characters, because then it kind of reinforces that majority narrative. So I think that not being enough is perfect, and you absolutely should write your experience, because at the end of the day, like you're never going to hit that like little quota that the publishing industry wants from you.
Say that, Kat. It's on you.
I also think the whole idea of not blank enough kind of makes there's a base. And what's that base? It's typically white, straight, cis, So it's like, if that's the base, then all you're saying is you're not close enough away or far enough away from the base to be your actual identity. So, like that, I don't know. That's just, for me, that the whole idea of you're not blank enough just says that this is what it's actually supposed to be, and you're just not even close enough for the things that aren't even, I don't know. That's just how I feel, but I've always been considered not blank enough, and that's always, okay, that should totally be the name of my autobiography.
And I would totally buy that. I would totally buy that. Well, one, before we get into our outros, I just want to thank everyone on this panel, especially our interpreters. You guys have done a fantastic job. You guys have provided everyone with some amazing information and amazing insights going forward. And so I just want to thank you guys for when I reached out to you, being willing to do this. I have been waiting since May to do this with you guys. So it has been such an awesome experience. We will start with Catalleya, go up to Liselle, then Marisa, then Kevin, then Lauren, and we will be out of here, guys. So, Kat, you go.
Hi, everyone. Welcome again. My name is Catalleya Storm, and I haven't been doing videos on my YouTube channel, but I will be ever since the whole pandemic stuff. I've needed a break, and the protests, which are still going on here, by the way, we're going strong. Yeah, my Instagram is where I'm more popping, I guess. Yeah, that's it about me. Black Lives Matter.
Is it me?
Yep.
Yeah. I'm Liselle Sambury. I do have an AuthorTube channel if you want to check that out. I am also a young adult author. My debut, Blood Like Magic, comes out in summer 2021 from Margaret K. McElderry. That's the one of the Simon and Schuster teen publishers. And I would love it if you added that to Goodreads. It's about a Black witch living in Toronto in a near future and the very difficult choices she has to make.
Hey everybody, thank you for watching. I am Marisa Mohi. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at the Marisa Mohi because somebody got my name and when I find them, they're in trouble. You can also follow me on YouTube, so just youtube.com/Marisa Mohi. I try to make videos regularly, but right now I'm in editing hell, and who knows when I will ever have time to make a video again because editing is very hard and I hate it.
I am Kevin the writer, or Kevlandia, or Kevin Savoie, whatever you want to call me. You can follow me here on YouTube, where I do make off-tube videos when when I'm not feeling dealing with depression, which is quite often. I try to do regularly, and yeah, I don't have anything to push. Just follow me if you want to. And it was great. It was great having you all here and being here.
My next.
Yes, ma'am.
Lauren, you can find my video here on YouTube. My channel is by Sight. I post videos of my poetry and discuss topics that affect the blind community. I am also living on Instagram if you want to come follow me, and that's Lauren Adele 1987. And thank you, Cache, for having me on here. I learned a lot.
You are very welcome. Again, my name is Cache Warren. You are here on my channel. This was the last panel for day 2 of the Evergreen Writing Oasis. Tomorrow, it will start bright and early, and you'll see me on the closing panel. Again, I want to thank my lovely co-hosts, panelists, these wonderful people on the screen. They have provided us with so much information. I'm so thankful for that. There will be a follow-up stream to this later this month. For those of you who still have more questions or you've had things that have come up now that you want to ask about later on, definitely be staying tuned for that. Some of these lovely people will be there with me that day as well. So again, I want to thank you so much for being here. You guys have a fantastic rest of your evening. We can't wait to see you tomorrow to end this weekend with a bang. Bye, you guys.